Welcome to this week's Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Byron Pace, and you are?
I'm Daryl. Hi, how you doing?
He's sitting here too. We've got a fun-filled podcast ahead with things like this.
Wicka wicka.
How am I going to drink this?
You'll just have to a straw. You need a straw. You can grab the mic and move it away.
How dare you suggest such a thing?
A biodegradable straw. Did you see the straws that someone came out with the other day made of pasta?
Made of what?
Pasta straws.
Pasta?
Yeah, pasta. Yeah. So they last longer.
We had this argument.
I thought you said it was made of pastors.
No.
Pasties.
No.
We had this argument the other day.
Well, how to pronounce pasta?
Yeah. So Valentine said it the same way. In the UK, they say pasta. But in
that took me a little
Italy, they say pasta, like we say pasta.
Well, I'm Italian, so I know that.
Right. So,
So we're wrong.
Yeah, pretty much. Aluminium.
I live on Aluminium Street.
I agree that's
There's
the way that we say
it's
it.
Not
I know, we're wrong.
I-U-M.
I know. And this?
Wait.
Away with you.
A shoe. But
Byron has one beer.
This is what we say in America.
And he turns into his magistrate mode.
Away. Butch, come here. This is what we do in America. Go lie down.
Hit the bricks.
Go lie down.
And a little bit more of this.
Some moron brought a cougar to a party and it went berserk.
So you can see, we had a really good time recording this. I was over in Montana. We were editing Volume 4, Modern Huntsman, which has landed in the UK now, by the way. So I need to change it from... Officially, yeah. I need to change it from pre-order to order on our website. But if you order it, it will go out within the next couple of days of you placing an order. So
I don't think you need to bother changing it. People don't read it anyway.
No, that is very, very true. So get your hands on Volume 4, the woman's issue. And if you don't know what that is all about, you're about to hear it because Nicole Qualtieri is the guest editor-in-chief of this issue. She talks a little bit about her background, how she got into hunting, what it's been like playing that role within the Modern Huntsman team.
Very cool.
Yeah,
and
very exciting.
I've seen the cover and I've seen quite a lot of the content inside. Not read any, just glanced over it. And it's going to be a very, very good issue.
I can't wait to start getting the feedback. I think some of the people in the States who had pre-orders are probably getting in their hands now.
Yeah, so if you see people in the States with Modern Huntsman, please don't send us an email saying, where's my copy? They got it first.
They did by about a week. But it is here now, so you should get it within the next few days with any luck. And let us know what you think. Yes. We'd like to hear that feedback. We'll pass it on to the team at Modern Huntsman, and we like to hear what you think about our contributions as well.
Definitely.
As Daryl has an article with Lisa, and I did an article on Annette Olofsson, who I spent a lot of time with this summer.
Yeah. I'm just trying to find... I got sent an email yesterday from part of our podcast provider thing with some reviews, but I can't find it. I'll try and find it. Yeah, it's a couple of people have left some really good reviews, and I was trying to find it.
Okay, well, I will mention a couple of things while Daryl is digging around. The first thing is Northern Shooting Show, 8th and 9th of May next year, 2020. It seems a little bit away yet, but the pre-order tickets are already up for sale. I will certainly be there, I think, hosting 1 or 2 talks in the big sort of symposium tent area, and it is one of our favorite shows of the year. It's always great. It's a fantastic laugh. It's a good group of people. The guys who run it and put it together are amazing, and we would love to see you there. So 8th and 9th of May, stick it in the diary, and if you're around in that part of the country, go and pre-book your ticket now. While I'm at it, Daryl's still scrolling furiously through his phone. I'm just going to mention a thank you to our Patreons. which this week top tier are Richard Stevens, Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman from rdcontracting.co.uk, Chris Griffith, John Henry Pete, Tom McCraith, the guys at South Ayrshire Stalking, James Benjamin Normandale, and James Marchington. Thank you very, very much for contributing so generously to the podcast, and all those people who we haven't mentioned, who support the podcast on lower tiers. Absolutely every penny, cent, pound, however you donate is massively appreciated, and it does make a difference. It allows me to do things like I've been doing the last 2 days, where I just drove up to Inverness. I did a podcast with Sam Thompson, which was a lot of fun as well. We did it with beer and chocolate, and that's going to be the first podcast of 2020. And I was at a salmon hatchery on the West Coast yesterday afternoon with Chris Conroy and a few other people to bring a podcast sort of a half interview, half from the field. So it took quite a bit of time, quite a bit of driving. But
even the $1 makes a difference.
Yeah.
It makes us being, because driving to Inverness is a 6 hour affair.
Yeah, it takes time.
Fuel in the UK is not that cheap.
So we are able to do such things because of your support. And if you would like to support the podcast, maybe this can be your thing for the start
Christmas.
of 2020.
Treat yourself at Christmas. And
treat
support
yourself
the
to treat us. And support the show. Just go over to Patreon and search The Pace Brothers, and you can have a look at all the tiers.
It'll be in the link of the
indeed.
show as well. I found it's not the latest, but it is from the 28th of last month. So
Okay.
I would say 3 really awesome reviews.
Let's give those people a shout out if they have names.
I can't see names unless they
You'll know who
leave
you
it.
are.
So there's one. So this is one end of last month. Said, what awesome work you're doing. Thank you so much for the quality and variousness of the subjects and guests on your shows. Definitely the best podcast about conservation, nature lovers, and hunting I've heard in years.
Whoa.
I hope more non-native English-speaking people will take the opportunity to listen to the show. Thinking about my friends in France and Germany. Keep on the good work, lads. Big cheers from South Bavaria, Maxim.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, so this person left their name at the bottom, but the other ones I can't see names.
Oh, that's very generous.
I can read another one, actually. I'm not sure where these reviews actually are on. They're on Apple, actually. This one here is, as a late onset hunter coming into the countryside a good deal older than most, I lack the community and knowledge of these issues that many grew up in. The Pace Brothers cover a global range of conservation hunting topics and have been a big part in my education in these areas, along with expanding and educating my view of the world around me. So
Fantastic.
I don't have a name for that, I'm afraid.
Well, that's a great lead into this podcast because Nicole only took up hunting when she was 30.
There we go.
So it is actually a topic that is covered in this podcast.
Sorry for the raspy voice. We're lucky this show didn't go out even 5 days ago because I was lying, dying on my sofa.
A lot of people have been ill recently.
In
It
fact,
took me 3 days. I'm obviously tougher than Daryl because it took him like about 8.
took me about 8 days, which actually I think is not bad because I know people that have been down for 2 weeks.
Like properly down.
With it for 2 weeks. So whatever it is, I think it was the plague or Ebola or something along those lines.
But you've shaken it off now.
Just, but I've still got the frog,
raspiness.
and the odd little cough, like I've been in the mines for too long.
We have a winner from our competition 2 weeks ago, which was a sound competition. And the sound, it wasn't guessed correctly by many people, I have to say.
No, it was a hard one, actually.
It was a slightly harder one than in previous weeks. But it was a skylark. So if you're wondering what that sound was, it was a skylark. And if you're around in our hills, or not even in our hills, even not very far from where we live here, in springtime,
you do hear them.
That is one of the sounds of spring. So congratulations to Sam Dean. Now, Sam Dean has won before, so it seems, because when I was looking up, he entered through Instagram. It turns out that he won a previous copy. So, I mean, we do it completely fairly. We just randomly pick somebody, and he's just very, very lucky that he won a copy
twice
of Volume 3 Modern Huntsman with us. So what we're going to do, Sam, is we will send you out a copy of Volume 4.
I think you're in the States.
You are, yes, I believe you're in the States. So just confirm that with us when you hear that you are the winner. And we will get a copy of Volume 4 sent out to you from the States rather than us sending it from here. And of course, beautiful synergy with this show. Not only have we just mentioned the competition, which is supported by Modern Huntsman, where you win a copy, but guest editor-in-chief of Modern Huntsman in this podcast, Nicole. This podcast has been supported for a long time now by the team at Modern Huntsman. So they allow us to bring you this show every 2 weeks. And if you don't know what we're talking about, you're about to find out more detail, but go onto the Modern Huntsman website. And if you haven't seen it before, it'll blow you away.
It's close to Christmas.
It is?
Where it's imminently upon us.
I just had an early Christmas present from my brother. He brought back a Maasai knife from his trip in Tanzania.
It was very cool.
Yeah, if you do say so yourself.
I got one myself. So.
it was extremely cool.
Yeah.
It's going to join all my other killing implements that I have from different parts of the world.
Yeah, I arrived in the UK with a spear and 2 knives, walking through the airport. And the spear was broken down as much as I could, but it's still a big thing. And I was a bit worried I wasn't going to get through the airport, but
you did.
I did. I mean, there's nothing wrong with these. I guess maybe if you landed in Heathrow, they might be a bit more dubious towards like massive spears and knives.
I try not to ask too many questions when I bring such things home. We're giving it away now.
Yeah.
We mustn't forget that we need to run another competition.
Oh, we do, yeah.
So if you're entering this competition hoping to get the correct answer in and get your copy of Modern Huntsman before Christmas, that's not going to happen because it takes 2 weeks to run this competition on the podcast.
Yes, but you'll get it just after.
You will get it just after, and we would love you to enter. And we're gonna keep with the theme, which has been the end of this year.
I hope everyone's been enjoying the animal sounds.
Yeah.
Let us know if you have.
Have you learned something?
Yeah, have you learned something? Have you been enjoying them? If you have, I don't know.
If you have another suggestion.
A suggestion, no, in fact, a suggestion for a sound that might be a strange
we would
animal that
love
we don't know about.
Send us in a sound.
That would be pretty cool. A dog's tail banging against a wall or something. I don't know.
So we're going to play you a sound now. All you have to do is contact us with the correct answer. And in 2 weeks' time, we will announce the winner and you'll win a copy of Volume 3, Modern Huntsman. So guess this sound.
So hopefully you've all guessed the sound and get entering on Instagram, Facebook, on the email. The email is actually very popular for the sound.
Yeah,
so
it is.
podcast@paceproductionsuk.com, pace_brothers on the Instagram.
Easy for us to track it on email too.
Yeah, it is. And on Instagram's pretty easy as well.
Yeah, we have a place to save them.
You've got a place to save it because now they've got like 2 inboxes in there. It's crazy. I was going to mention Game Changer, Netflix documentary that everyone is talking about, as well as the program the BBC has aired about a week ago.
I'm trying to remember what it was called. Was it called Meat?
Yeah, it was about meat.
Yeah.
I'm going to find what it's actually called now, but it's been causing a lot of upset from everyone. So the meat one from the BBC was looking at farming practices particularly, but most of it was filmed in America and South America.
Kind of distorted British meat production.
Yeah, so the farmers are very upset about it in the UK, understandably, because it is effectively attacking their livelihood and industry. And it's not even looking at the practices that get done here, which, from my understanding and what I've seen, the animal welfare practices here are held to a much higher standard than they are in the US, let alone South America.
And I haven't actually seen the program, but from the articles that I read that came out after, I think that one of the issues was that there was zero distinction made.
No, there wasn't.
It was this broad, sweeping statement about all cattle production and beef production.
Yes. And looking at the Game Changer documentary, and this is a Netflix show, and the premise of the show is showing you basically that you should not be eating meat, and it shows you professional athletes and how well they're doing on meat-free diets. But there's been a few issues with it. One being that James Cameron was the director of it, and he owns plant-based food company. Also, as well as that, if you listen to the Joe Rogan show, I would love to get someone with a bit of knowledge on nutrition on our show talking about it, is that a large amount of these professional athletes, not talking about this documentary, but just in general, that go to the vegan lifestyle don't last particularly long on it.
There are a couple of examples of people who have done it for a long time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right. Most of them, they try it for a bit, they feel better.
Yes, for a short period of time. And they're having to also take supplements as well. and then eventually they kind of reverse back to more vegetarian, and then a little bit of supplement with meat, because as it's talked about in the show, there is certain people that can live fine with no meat, but there's a huge amount of us that
need that protein
need it.
Yeah, we should dig into that more. It'd be a really interesting podcast if we can.
But that was just one snippet of the whole show, because they also go on about in the Game Changer thing about cattle and CO2, and but the thing they forget to mention is that there is some farming practices that can effectively be carbon neutral if you look after the grasslands and the.
Well, that was one of the clips that came out afterwards on social that was excluded from the film, was talking about carbon neutral beef production.
Yes, which is a real thing.
Yeah, which is a real thing. I mean, it's not that common, to be fair, but at the extremes,
Yeah, it is the extreme end. But the point being is that even if, let's say, you've got a vast majority of farming practices that go on here, they might not be carbon neutral, but I don't think they're quite as bad as what they're putting on.
No, what they completely failed to mention was that successfully and efficiently managing grasslands is a massive carbon sink.
Massive. There was a study done. It was a farmer in the US, and his grass wasn't doing too well, so he actually hired someone to study the soils, and they taught him how to do proper rotations with the cattle. And now he is basically a carbon farmer. That's what he is. He obviously doesn't make any money from it, but
that's how he manages.
That's how he manages his farm now, based on the carbon footprint that he's doing, and he's now having some more successful yields in grass growing, and thus the cattle are
doing better.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I think that should be one of our plans for the early part of 2020. Would be we need to go watch all those programs and then get some real experts on to talk about it from both sides.
I wonder who would be best, because there's one thing just getting someone that was like an ex-vegan on to talk about it, but
I'm talking about science.
Yeah, no, we need a nutritionist or a biologist or
both. I think we probably need maybe someone from the ecology side, and then probably from the human element.
There's two different parts to this. There's the
environmental impact,
and then there's also, can a human actually?
Yeah, so probably some form of doctor that specializes in nutrition.
Yeah.
So
if you know anyone, let us know, please.
Yeah, please do. But otherwise, we will work on that, bring you something next year.
Yeah, especially the sporting side of things, because that's where very much they're trying to push.
I think we can probably contact somebody in the sporting world fairly easily to talk about that. So I think we will leave you to it. We have one more show before Christmas.
One more before Christmas.
Which I think, as it stands right now, I'm planning on editing together the podcast that I did with Chris at the fish farm. Which is going to be a slightly different format. So it's quite a bit more work, but a slightly different format to what you're used to. A little bit of interview, a little bit of in-the-field chat.
So what we want to do, because we always have a break between Christmas and New Year, because everyone's with their families and, people are doing other things. But when we first launched the podcast, going on 5 years now, on the first year, there was like one person downloaded on Christmas Day. We're like, wow,
that was because we only had like 5 listeners.
Yeah, well, a few hundred, But now, I think last year we had 300-400 people downloading on Christmas morning, and it was definitely just people that got like new phones, new iPads. But the fact that there was hundreds of people downloading the show on Christmas Day was pretty cool.
It was cool.
But there's always a slump between Christmas and New Year. So what our plan is,
we have some time off, and we let you guys not listen to us.
But I think in January you want to kick it off with like the highest downloaded show that we've ever had.
It's going to be Sam's.
Yeah.
Because Sam has been the first show of the year and always does really well for the last 2 years. So we're going to put Sam's out, and then we've got an amazing one with Ben Williams.
But I think that's the push. We need to make it
big January.
It's going to be the highest downloaded show that we've had ever, and that will also push us into the charts.
Yeah. So please look out at the start of January and get ready to download what we put out.
Yes. And hit subscribe.
And while you're talking around the dinner table at Christmas and New Year and whatever other festive things that you do, tell other people to listen to the show.
Yeah, and we have more podcast car stickers for inside and outside the car.
And all of our Patreon supporters on every single tier, all the things that we are due you have now been fulfilled. That guy posted them 2 days ago, so you should be getting them all through the post.
So if you join the $1 tier of the Patreon,
you get a podcast sticker.
You get a podcast sticker. So it's worthwhile joining Patreon to get your sticker.
Yeah, but if you're going to buy a sticker, go join Patreon.
Exactly.
Thanks very much for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show. Nicole, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast.
Oh, it's so good
Hopefully,
to be here.
we're going to continue the way that we've started, which is just full of laughter.
Yes.
I'm feeling a little bit left out because I'm sitting here with a cup of tea, and you've got an incredibly large glass of whiskey, and Tyler has a beer. I mean, not because they don't let me drink or anything, but because I decided that tea was what was required.
I tried to pressure you into an Oktoberfest pumpkin beer.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
You never told me that's what it was. And for those people listening, yes, Tyler is here as well. He is stepping in for my brother once again because I think he's home now, but he hasn't actually told me if he's home. But I assume he's got back from Tanzania. Okay.
Doing my best to do comedy, Daryl.
So we met for the first time, I don't know, like 4 or 5 days ago.
Yeah, like last weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it was the same, like exactly a week ago.
Yeah, it was. It was last Friday night.
It was great to have so many people in the room involved in this next volume of Modern Huntsman, which is basically all I've been thinking about and doing all week.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Which is, I hope my other job doesn't listen to this.
Just
You
kidding.
have another job?
Didn't you know?
No, I didn't. I thought this was it for you.
Yeah, I'm the hunting and fishing editor for GearJunkie.com. So I write about outdoor gear.
But not this week.
Yes.
Yes, this week. Okay.
Yes, very much so this
Yes.
week.
Once you knocked
It's
off
been
work, then you were doing Modern Huntsman
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. It's been, it was funny today because I started working and I
Which
realized I just
working?
like had my full-time
Your
job
day job,
working.
okay.
Yeah. And I just couldn't focus and I was like, I'll just do some work this weekend. Yeah, it's been a lot of the grind, but like a good grind. It's really fun.
So what was your original hookup with Tyler and Modern Huntsman team? How did that come about?
It's kind of funny. It's sort of like Shades of Grey, but I was working with Corey Emerson from Chama Chairs.
Yeah.
And Corey, I had talked a little bit. I feel like he just said something like you guys would get along, and Tyler and I were connected through that.
So that
But
was
I
some
don't know.
time
It's
ago.
kind
was
of
it?
just like
We emailed back and forth a couple times about contributions and things like that. And as you know, it's just been kind of a little bit of a hectic. And so once we decided to do the women's issue and bring in editors, I had her on my list. And so we just reached back out. And initially you were just going to be help us editing. And then,
kind of like do some advising and do some like associate editor.
yeah, because Jillian had agreed to be editor in chief, and then Jillian just had too much going on. And anyways, it was fire season and all that. And Jillian and I both at the same time was like, we should get Nicole to do that. So yeah, here we are.
It's like it's a huge honor. Thank you. I'm
That's
really
Glad
excited
to
about
have
it.
you.
Yeah,
It's been great
Cheers,
to have you
guys.
on board.
Oh, thank you.
And how have you been enjoying the process?
Yeah,
Like
I think
with this sort of the group of people that have been pulled in to do this incredible volume.
right. Well, I mean, the volume focuses on women, and I think sort of by default, I've been able to have a voice in that sphere in the hunting world, and it's been pretty incredible to be able to not only develop relationships further that I've already had in the industry. Jess Johnson has been a good friend for a long time.
Yeah, we just podcasted with her.
Yeah, she's
this other day.
fabulous.
In fact, our podcast is already out as we're recording.
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
It's gone.
And then Jillian and I have been mutual admirers of each other for a long time. We've actually never met in person, but just through the process, and I've gone to her for opinions throughout this. So it's been really nice to have someone to bounce things off of, and I think we have like a very similar outlook on a lot of things. So it's been nice to sort of have her as like an echo in the back of my mind. And then, with all the other women that we've been able to bring in and work with, it's, there's a multitude of experience and personalities and levels of storytelling from all over the planet, and that's a crazy gift. Like it's an absolute gift to be able to work with people that can bring me out of my like very like Montana Western hunting element, and kind of open my eyes to other things that are going on. So it's, in my regular life, I'm working a lot with brands and writing a lot about gear and writing a lot of news stories. So to be able to devote a lot of my time to something that's like more creative nonfiction, like a little bit more like focused on science and story, like it's been a gift. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your contribution for this volume, because I'd read it for the first time yesterday. Where did the inspiration for that come from?
So I wrote a story that right now is titled Going It Alone. I think it's pretty like apt, but I mean, I'm open to change. I wanted to write about hunting by myself and sort of being in the backcountry by myself. I've been backpacking solo since 2014. And my first backpacking trip, I did 150 miles on the Continental Divide Trail by myself.
That's hardcore.
Yeah, it was pretty. I tend to be an all-in type of person, so there's no really like
No halfway house.
Yeah, there's no like backwater way in. Like it's full dive. So, I did that and cut my teeth real quickly, and kind of from there, especially being outside alone, it was really like you become very aware of what's going on around you. And I was able to have a lot of really cool experiences with wildlife being by myself. When you move quietly through the woods, things don't leave. So you walk into situations that can be scary, but you also walk into situations that can be very eye-opening. And through those experiences, I became really curious about becoming a hunter, because I felt like if there was one factor or like one faction of people that had the experiences that I was having out in the woods by myself, it was probably the hunting population. So, but anyway, so it was sort of a like a self-revelation, like out on the trail. And then that's kind of what the story is about. It's about this
sort of finding yourself by yourself.
Yeah, and coming up against that fear, which I think a lot of people have, and dealing with it.
I think there's a certain contentment that you find by yourself. Not all the time, but sometimes, which you can't find when you're with other people.
I agree. Yeah, there's also like a sense of capability and like being able to say, "Oh, I'm really capable." Of this and taking care of myself back here. And that, I think that, especially as, I don't know that there's like that big of a difference between like men and women going out in the woods, but I think as women, we're conditioned to have a lot of fears about being alone, and like the way that I've experienced the world is like, like walking by a dark alley and being like, I'm not going to take that way. I'm going to take the way, like even if my car is like right on the other side of it, like I'm going to take the street lit way, So there are certain things that like we've just been conditioned to think as women that I think, at least for this particular volume and what we're writing about, I think there is some gender specificity to facing those fears, to understanding that like you're able to be alone in the backcountry. I do a lot of traveling. I've done international travel by myself. And it's all been really like liberating. And so really like the core of that story is like not being afraid to face the things that you're afraid of. I guess which like, it's a little circular, but yeah, and interwoven into that story is my 2018 mule deer buck that I killed by myself.
I love the to and fro between that.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Because it kept jumping between those sort of two aspects, and I thought that was a real nice flow.
I hope it doesn't spoil part of the theme of the story, but technically in the story you're not hunting by yourself. You have a companion. That's
true. My companion is fear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to weave in the story because I feel like there are characteristics of hunting that are like very like final. I think like you have to take the shot, right? And there are so many things that go into that moment, but there are so many things that come after it. And for me, that is such an emotional buildup and it's such an emotional letdown. And so I think when you take the life of an animal, like for me, it hasn't been a part of my life until the past 5 years. So I'm 35. So I didn't even pick up a gun until I was 30 years old. And it's been a very like transformative experience, but it's also one that's been very tenuous. And that like, I'm a beginner, like I still see myself as a beginner. Even, with the past like 3 animals that I've killed, 2 out of the past 3 I've killed solo. So, after my first year, I was like, okay, I'm going to go out and kind of figure this out for myself.
It must have been a little daunting, though, just picking up hunting at that point in your life. I mean, I'm not saying that because you're a woman. For a man a woman, 30 years old, it's not part of your life. Like, where was your starting point? Because that's quite often a question that people have is, I'm intrigued by this, but where do I start? Because it wasn't handed down to them by their parents, which, it so often is.
I think that I'm an exceptional circumstance because I went from that backpacking trip to working on the television show Meat Eater. So
you flipped from one extreme to the other.
Well, yeah.
Because most people who listen to this podcast will have probably watched Meat Eater.
Yeah. I was super lucky. I love telling this story because I'd worked in corporate America for my 20s. Basically, like I went into a service program called the AmeriCorps after college, and then after that I basically worked in corporate sales. And so I moved to Montana for a job in corporate publishing, and I managed the Montana-Idaho region for basically a textbook publisher. And
so publishing is a good fit for you now then.
Yeah, it certainly is. I'm on the more fun side of it. I'm on the side that I'm better at this point, but I hated that job, and especially living in Bozeman at that point, I came to this conclusion that, I didn't want to hand my life away to corporate America. Like I really wanted to have some ownership, and I felt like that space was going to be in the outdoors. I certainly never saw it as being hunting, but I took a summer off. I took a severance. I bartended and kind of took some odd jobs for a while until I was like, okay, I want to go into media, and then took a summer off, backpacked.
Where was this, by the way?
This is all in Bozeman.
It was in Bozeman. Okay.
Yeah. So then I came back to Bozeman. I was looking for a job, and I found a social media gig on Craigslist for a show called Meat Eater.
Which you'd never heard of.
Which I'd never heard of. And
I like food.
Yeah. Well, no, it was funny because I was like, I don't want to work on a hunting show because like my preconceived notion of a hunting show was that, it was kind of redneck. And
some of them are.
And some of them really are, yeah. And I had no interest in that side of it. But I went and read, I went to the library and pulled some of Vernella's books.
Which one did you read? The one on buffalo?
No, I read The Scavenger's Guide to Haute Cuisine, which is so fabulous. Yeah, it's my favorite Vernella book.
Have you read the buffalo book, though?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's still your favorite? Because the buffalo book's exceptional.
It is.
I can't actually remember what it's called. It's not called the Buffalo Book.
Scavenger's Guide to Haute Cuisine is like true storytelling, Okay. And I think that like when you look at, not that American Buffalo isn't, but American Buffalo is certainly like incredibly well researched. It's an amazing story, and I guess it has that like weaving element, right? From going from like the history of the bison.
Yeah, it's a storytelling with a historical aspect,
which is incredible writing. Like it's certainly an amazing book. But on a level of like storytelling, I love Scavenger's Guide to Haute Cuisine.
I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, you should. Basically, Vernella found Escoffier's cookbook from 1901, and he ends up taking a year to like travel around the States and get all these like crazy ingredients. So like he has to like get pigeons from like underneath like an interstate. I don't know. It's like it's really funny, and it's like it's a pretty charming book, and it's very different from I think a lot of what Steve's work was after that. But
so this was obviously enough for you to say, yeah.
I mean, it was telling the story of hunting and like a very different from a very different viewpoint, and so to get back to your question, as someone who was curious about hunting, I mean, there isn't a more like exceptional opportunity to fall in your lap than to be surrounded by people that I think are some of the best mentors in hunting today. You know, I sat 6 feet away from Giannis Patelis. I was working with Steve every day. I mean, like, those types of opportunities aren't something that, like, most people get. And so I'm super grateful for it. It's like, not only has it carved
So your
the path
learning
for my
curve would have
career-
been steep.
It was a steep learning curve. Yeah, I mean, I stepped into the social media role and I was truly like a non-hunter at that point. You know, I hadn't even gone to hunter's ed. So like learning how to communicate as a hunter, I mean, it was basically me asking Giannis like 400 questions a day, you know, and making a lot of mistakes along the way too, I think. But we also kind of had the room to make mistakes at that point. I mean, our audience was pretty small. In the course of the 2 years that I was there, I grew the... Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
That's all right.
That was
Wyatt
so
is
good,
howling.
Wyatt.
I think it's Wyatt.
It's probably mule deer or the shadow of mule deer.
They're evil.
We've had him singing in the car most of the day while we've been driving.
Oh, nice. So essentially, I'm in the situation where like our audience is pretty small at this point. So essentially when I stepped in, we had, I think they just hit like 100,000 on Facebook. That was kind of like, this is December 2014. So like everything was kind of just starting. It was like algorithmically like the most beautiful time to be in social media.
Yeah. Not like now.
Not like now. So I picked up Meat Eater when it had 10,000 followers on Instagram, and within 2 years I'd grown it to 100,000. So a lot of that was, how do you channel somebody's voice and how do you do it in a way that's responsible? So I feel like from Steve's ethic, from like working in a place where we were really focused on story, and then figuring out how do I translate this to a greater audience that's going to pull in more people, right? So I was always thinking about that broader picture. I didn't want it to be, and I mean, neither did Steve or anyone there. It's a group effort, but how do we share like what we're doing with the broadest community possible? I mean, like, not only is that the best goal for your audience, right? But as far as telling a good hunting story, I mean, I still don't think there's anyone that's quite done it like Stephen Ranella has. So I felt very lucky to be in that particular scenario, and I can't say one way or another whether I would have become a hunter or not. You know what I mean? If I hadn't have found that particular avenue, which made it super accessible. But I mean, I still had to work for it.
There was no shortage of offers for people taking you at that point because you were working in an office full of people who were hunting all the time.
Well, Giannis took me on my very first hunt, but beyond that, I really did have to work for myself to find it. And so I was volunteering with backcountry hunters and anglers, and that's actually where I met my hunting partners. Huh. So
tell us a little bit about BHA, because like outside of North America, most people don't know.
Yeah,
but I think BHA are great.
Yeah, so Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is a public lands advocacy group. Technically, they're out of Missoula, Montana, but they're an international organization. They have chapters across Canada and the U.S. and goals to expand more broadly. But they do great work. A lot of the work that they do is access-based, so figuring out how to get hunters and anglers more access. They also do a lot of conservation work. You know, like when we went through the national monuments debacle, they were really fighting for a lot of those protections.
It seems to be quite a, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my impression of it from what I've read and hear is it's quite a young group of people in terms of an organization.
Huge. In terms of a hunting organization, it's incredibly young. Yeah. I think the average person is between like 36 and 44.
Wow.
You know, and when you think about like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation or some of these other organizations, they tend to be a little bit older. But I mean, that's also, I think that a lot of people come to conservation when they're a little bit older and they're kind of out of their like youth phase of hunting, and they might have a little bit more money to dedicate to conservation. You know what I mean? So BHA has made it really accessible to young people. I mean, you can pay $25 and be a member of the organization. So I think they've done a really good job at figuring out what their demographic is. Lan Tani is the CEO and president, and I always say he's like the star of the football team. You know what I mean? Like, he's like a great cheerleader, and he's really good at sort of like rallying the team and bringing everybody in. There are a lot of really incredible people working there, doing amazing things. They have a great program for bringing in new hunters. Right now, it's more focused on like college-aged kids.
That's great.
Yeah,
I
super cool.
I need to get him on the podcast actually. At some
You
point.
should, yeah. He's a lot of fun.
So that was your that's how you managed to get your access and build friendships within the hunting industry in the early days.
Yeah, we started like our own like mini chapter in Bozeman to work on like different conservation issues like around town and figure out like what we could do to help people get access, or have more mentors and that type of thing. So it was a lot of fun, and a lot of those people are still in like my core friend and hunting group.
So what was your first hunt alone? By yourself? Like, at what point did you feel like, okay, I can do this by myself?
Well, my first hunt alone was actually after I went with Giannis, so it would have been like my second time hunting, you know? So I just went out and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I ended up taking a shot at a deer and I missed, which I'm really grateful that I missed, because I'm not sure that I would have known what to do. I mean, I think that I would have figured it out. And actually it was actually only about 30 minutes away from where we are. And there were a couple of older gentlemen, and they were in a pickup truck in the parking lot. And I was going to walk down the trail and go hunting. And they were like, well, if you get something, let us know and we'll come help you. So I kind of felt like I had a little bit of backup. But I like to do things, not necessarily to accomplish them, but like to experience them, So I think a lot of it was, can I go hunting by myself? Can I find habitat? Like, will I come into, will I find deer? So that was kind of my first foray into it, and that was 2015. And then, my first like real hunt by myself would have been that 2016 hunt where I killed the deer. I write about that in the article. After 9 days of hunting by myself across the state of Montana. So it was kind of an epic road trip.
It's a lot of hunting.
Yeah, I did so I was actually working at Backcountry Hunters and Anglers then. That's why I left Meat Eater to go work at Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and do some of their media for a year. And we were able to take a week, they call it a backcountry week. So
sounds like an excuse to go hunting.
Yeah, it's a big excuse to go hunting for everybody on staff. It's an amazing excuse to go hunting, and you have to use it to either hunt or fish.
Oh, right. So this is like prescribed.
Yeah, it's part of your like employment package there.
With holidays on top of it. Or is
yeah,
this like
it's like the greatest vacation structure. It's like it's like a group of hunters and anglers got together and they're like, what do we want for vacation? And I mean, as far as like US vacation, so we got 3 weeks of paid vacation and then a backcountry week on top of that. For the US, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, so it was amazing because I hunted probably 40 days that fall, like in the midst of doing a full-time job.
There's a lot of very jealous people listening to this podcast right now. 40 days.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, I was really excited and adamant to fill my tag that year. So I got to put a lot of miles on the ground and do a lot of time just waiting and, spotting and stalking. And I had a lot of opportunities and I wanted to wait until the right one. And I was really lucky that I came into my lap on that last day. So
I'm just thinking to myself that we need to structure our time better, Tyler, so we can hunt a bit more.
I know.
We did manage.
I don't get to hunt that much now.
I know.
Even as a freelance.
Yeah,
dude, that's the worst though. I did way more hunting when I wasn't freelancing.
Great.
Way more.
Because your time is structured differently.
Yes, because it's structured. And in fact, I did way more hunting when I hated my job.
Well, yeah, don't we all?
Yeah, because I hated my job. So as soon as I wasn't doing that job, I was doing the things that I enjoyed. But because I'm kind of immersed in the things that I enjoy all the time, I seem to forget to go and actually do the thing that I enjoy, which is go hunting. Although I did for the first time get to cast in the Yellowstone River today. Which
I'm so excited
is something
for you.
that I've
It's
wanted to
very
do
special.
since a little kid.
Maybe one day you'll catch a fish there.
Yeah, maybe one day.
It was a little slow. It was a little slow today.
I had a really shit guide, and he wasn't very good on the oars. No, I didn't care. It was beautiful to float the Yellowstone.
It's a
and
gift.
cast a fly.
Yeah, it's
It was
so
a pretty
cool.
day. It's been such a weird season, though, and especially with the snow. We were laughing today. We were driving into town, and Livingston, all the leaves were in the road. So literally with that one snowstorm, all the leaves turned yellow and died and fell off the tree.
So, yeah,
in
it's
one
really
day.
depressing.
It was fall.
No fall season.
We had no fall.
We had no fall. Yeah, I mean, the trees are still in this like transitive state of like changing from green to yellow, and it's hard. This is my favorite season, so for it to just skip
disappear.
is like really,
Yeah.
it's like it's a real kick in the stomach.
So, being involved as much as you have been in the media and social media space within the hunting world, have you seen any sort of major mistakes that we've made as a community? Because we often have this discussion that we haven't done, like Tyler and I have it all the time. We've had it on the podcast, that we haven't done a very good job as a global community of really telling our story in a way that can be understood and people can understand the benefits of hunting, within ecosystems or conservation and management. I mean, you must have been looking at it all the time. What's your sort of feeling on that? Because I imagine all the stuff that you were putting out, you must have had that in the back of your mind, where you're
All the time, yeah,
you're trying
yeah.
to engage with people who aren't just hunters.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is that I actually grew up in the Midwest and then came out west. We moved from Ohio to Colorado when I was in high school. So I was 16 when we moved to Colorado. And then I spent the majority of my adult life in the West. I lived in Boston for a year, but I certainly have, and I had preconceived notions prior to coming into hunting. And I think that it's impossible to not see media images of hunting, even if you're just, a regular member of the public. And typically it's a negative situation, right?
What was your feeling? Because that's 30 years, right?
Yeah.
So
well,
the third, or had you kind of dipped in a little bit or not really?
I was never against hunting. It was just so out of my purview. It was never a part of my internal life to really be thinking about it.
So you never concerned yourself about it to really form a strong opinion one way or the other?
No, but I also
it's a bit
think
more
that
normalized here in North America than in other parts.
It is. I grew up around whitetail hunting in Ohio, so that was a deep part of the general culture.
You could see it around you.
Yeah, I actually, before we moved, I was going to take my hunter's ed because
explain hunter's ed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay. Well, once you're finished, explain. Hunter's
Ed. So hunter's ed is essentially a class that every hunter in America, for the most part, has to take. In some states, there are you can age out of it. Technically, I didn't have to take hunter's ed in Montana.
I think our year was the last year. If you were born,
it's January 1st, 1985.
Oh, it was 85. Okay.
Yeah. So, so we both hit that. We didn't technically have to. But I mean, there are a lot of states that you go to that you have to have hunter's ed. So it was well, I need hunter's ed anyway. I hunted ducks and geese in Washington last year. I needed my hunter's ed to be able to go over there and hunt. So hunter's ed is essentially a course that you take where you fulfill a time requirement of education in order to be able to hunt.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
So
you can do it. You can do it from the time that you're 10 to 12 years old. My friend's daughter just did it. She's 13. So when you're a kid, you take it in a classroom. So you have to do a certain number of classroom hours, 15 to 20 hours in a classroom. For adults, we can take it online, and then we do a field course. So it's usually 4 hours long, and you go out and you shoot 22s and shotguns, and it's essentially a gun safety course. More than anything, it's a gun safety course. And then you have to take a bow hunter's ed class if you want to archery hunt. So I actually got a lot more out of the bow hunter. Not that I have anything against gun safety, but as far as being a hunter, a hunter's education,
you learn more.
Yeah, they teach you how to track and all of that kind of stuff. So I wished that I had taken the archery class in addition to like the initial hunter's ed class, because I think that it would have given me a more holistic understanding, like going into being a hunter.
So do you need to prove that you've got your hunter's ed before you can buy an over-the-counter?
Usually.
You can. You
Yeah.
have to,
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you were going to buy a license. Yeah, they would probably ask you for hunter's ed, even if it was an upland license. So
how would you?
If you're under the age limit, yeah.
85 is the cutoff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd need it.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that works though. For
Get to work. Do your hunter's ed.
There must be a way around it, because people come in and hunt with outfitters all the time in North America, and they don't have to do the hunter's ed. Foreign hunters.
Yeah,
don't
but
know.
I think the outfitters probably get the licenses and tags
for them, so
them.
you're not getting. Yeah, okay.
You're not buying it over the counter.
It's we don't have.
I'd be interested in actually how that works. So
Yeah.
we should look into it.
Yeah, it's not something I've done, so I don't know yet. But we don't. There are training courses that you can do back in the UK, but none of it's required.
Yeah, there might be some reciprocity though. Like if there's a hunting like course there that would be reciprocal to like something.
Here, no. But what I meant was that it's everyone does it here.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you're a certain age.
Yeah.
Whereas at home, I'd say most people haven't done any of the courses. Although they
right.
do exist, there's no requirement to do them. And there's a lot of resistance actually to making them compulsory. A lot of resistance. Whereas there are conversations being had that why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we have a certain level of training before you can take a gun into the hills and go hunt, and at least be able to prove that. And I think the resistance largely
It's one of the
comes
few
from the
things
older.
our country has gotten right.
I think the resistance comes largely speaking from the older parts of the community.
Right. Because they see it as traditional and something they pass down.
Feel
wanna
like
go through the extra
they
effort.
always did that, so why should they have to do something now? But I suppose maybe one of the ways to do it would be like what you've done is everyone born after a certain date.
Yeah.
You got to do a training course.
Yeah. I think it's pretty fair.
So one of the I'm just thinking now. Actually, I can remember the last time I discussed this. It was at a game fair, and it was on a panel debate. And one of the arguments that came up was we should never do that because it adds another barrier for people entering into the hunting space. What would you say to that? Because you have
I would say that that's actually to think of education as a barrier to me is a little mind blowing. Like I think that if there's one thing that actually gives people access to anything, it's educating
education.
them. So I think that there are a lot of people that take hunter's ed and do go out by themselves and try to figure it out. I mean, that was one of the interesting things working on Meat Eater. I fielded a lot of our messages from people, and people were always like, how do I do this? How do I get access? And I mean, the first thing we're able to be like is, go to your hunter's ed, like talk to your instructors, find out like what you have available for you. I mean, like in some states they have like a Becoming an Outdoors Woman program. So like you can go hunt pheasants, with mentors and women, and they like take you out there and kind of walk you through it. Or, there's other ways to get in touch with different mentoring communities. So I don't know. I think to think of education as a barrier. I mean, our hunter's ed costs like $25, which is hardly an economic barrier to anyone. I mean, my elk tag is $18,
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's yeah.
No,
to me,
I would be
it's a
tempted to
little
agree with
wonky.
you. In fact, I'm going to steal that argument
Yeah,
the next
please
time
do.
it comes up, and I'm going to say exactly that. Education should never be seen as a barrier, because you're right. It is to make us better at what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't cost too much.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a $500 course, we'd have a lot
that
less
would be
hunters,
different.
know? Like, I think that, like, when you make it... I mean, the nice thing is that, like, it's all already out there. Like, if you go to huntered.org, I think, hunter-ed.org...
And I think it's $35, maybe,
yeah,
something
it's not,
like that.
It's, like, between $25 and $35,
Yeah.
and it's, like, it's... I mean, like I said, I didn't have to take it, but I did, and I mean that was before I thought that I would ever hunt out of state, and I wanted to take it because I wanted to have access to the information that was out there.
So I get the distinct feeling and impression now that from just sort of finding your way into hunting, it's now become a pretty large part of your life.
Yeah, at least for a part of the year. I think it's been really interesting because I feel like I have so many, like when you think of yourself as like the entirety of your persona, right? Like there are so many people within hunting that like they identify as a hunter. Like I know so many people in Montana that like
We're both sitting here in green right now. Could you identify
yeah,
us?
yeah. Well,
To be fair, I wear green all the time.
So do I. That's why I had to go and buy some new clothes for this trip because I didn't have anything that wasn't green.
oh my God, that's amazing. Well,
At least it wasn't all camo.
yeah, kudos
It's
for
just,
solids.
It's just solids.
Yeah, we need more solids out there. I've been really excited to like see more solids coming into women's gear,
I'm
like
not
on
a
an
camo
aside. But I lost my train of thought. Where are we? Hunter's identity.
yeah.
Okay, so it's very interesting because like hunting is so traditional and familial in much of the states. So like I think there are a lot of people that grow up like on their dad's hip or like in the backpack, basically like hunting from the time that they're 3 years old. So like hunting has been like such a defining characteristic for them. Like they identify as a hunter. Like for me, hunting is like a part of my whole. I don't like, as much as it's a part of my life and now it's become a part of my profession and it's something I'm really passionate about. Like I feel like there's still like multitudes of other things that have been like giant factors leading up to who I am, and hunting has occupied such a small time period of that. So I like to honor it because I think it's been really transformative. But yeah, understanding it as part of my identity has been like a little bit of a journey to be able to tell people that I'm a hunter.
You're like 5 years in.
Yeah, I'm still young. So like in my hunting terms, right? So like there's the feeling of still being a beginner, but like being really lucky and that like I get to share that with other people. I mean, there's a real kind of honor in being able to like be in the position that I am to communicate to so many people while still being a beginner. But I think that there's also like a little bit of grace in that because I can tell people like how to get started, right? Like,
because people at the start of their journeys can very much relate because it's sometimes easy to forget, or I probably have forgotten a lot of it, what it was like going through those phases because I was so young. I was like 2 years old.
Right. And
when I was first out doing stuff, like obviously I wasn't actually doing it, but I was partaking in it because I was following my dad around like a shadow.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that like the reality of that is that when you're an expert in something, you don't necessarily know what to tell people. I think that like some of the best teachers aren't necessarily the best, like even within the hunting sphere, right? Like you can look at some of the most expert hunters in the world. They're not necessarily going to be the best teachers. Like a lot of what they learned is through things they've intuited by watching other people, by being mentored, like by being in all these different positions. But like nobody ever told me, when to walk up to my deer and figure out if it was alive or not, right? So
because it's a default thing that people have been doing it for so long, just you do it.
Yeah. So like I think that there are so many things that people that grow up traditionally hunting have, it reminds, like I go back to this example, but I've ridden horses my whole life and that's been a huge part of who I am.
Yeah, and we were talking about saddles every time I've met you.
I know, it's been such a pain in the ass. I've been trying to find a saddle for my horse and she's just impossible. So a lot of what I learned as a rider, like especially starting out very young, was by watching. So, I mean, I think it's the same thing in hunting. I think a lot of people go and they're able to have all of these experiences around hunts before they actually hunt. And my first deer hunt, the first time that I saw a deer die was at my own hands. So that's like a very different entry point, and I wish it hadn't have been like, I wish it hadn't been that way. I wish that I'd experienced
a lot to take in.
Oh yeah, it was
to see that for the first time.
Well, and I took a bad shot
at that point in your life, having never seen it before. Because I watched a lot of hunting going on around me. In many forms, from birds to deer and rabbits and everything else.
Yeah,
way before I'd pulled the trigger myself on something like that.
Yeah, and it was totally mind blowing. It like completely rocked my world, and I took a bad initial shot. I mean, I think like when you're under that kind of pressure, like, it was almost one of those moments where it's like, can I pull a trigger on an animal? You know what I mean? Like, can I do this? And it was just kind of like, I think that we do everyone a disservice when we tell beginning hunters, we're like, you need to take a perfect shot. Well, there is no perfect shot when you're a beginner. There's just the first shot, and it's probably not going to be perfect. And so I took 2 imperfect shots on my first 2 deer. Luckily, my second deer, I hit him in the jugular, and so like he died really, really quickly. But there's a learning curve to it, On my third deer, I took like the most perfect spot on shot. But I had to go through those other experiences to get there, to be able to like be cool and calm and collected, to like really like be in the moment and like not be overcome by the sense of adrenaline. And I'm happy to share those stories because I don't think it makes me a bad hunter. It just makes me someone who's
makes
learned.
You an honest hunter.
Yeah.
And I think that in those those early experiences, if I was to think back at it for me, is that what was more important was that I was truly concerned about how I'd taken the shots, because I wanted to do the best job that I could. And of course, it's not going to be perfect when you start out, but you keep pushing towards trying to make sure that you are being the most efficient and ethical hunter that you can be.
Right.
So that you're reducing all of those risks around not taking a shot that's going to drop an animal quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I practiced.
Yeah.
But there's nothing like having an animal on the
it.
other side of the scope. Oh, I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. I cried for days after my first year.
Which is not what the public at mass would perceive a hunter to be.
No, absolutely not. That was
heartless
that
person.
was the absolute.
But it bothered you.
Oh, absolutely. It bothered me like for 2 years that I took such a bad shot. And it really wasn't like that terrible. Within 20 minutes, he was on the ground and the second shot was taken. So it's like how it's very hard to mitigate that. It's hard to going from not being a hunter to being in this really terrible situation and being like, oh, I got into hunting because I wanted to mitigate suffering. I wanted to get out of like a food cycle that I felt was putting suffering in undue places. And then I'm inflicting suffering. It's a very like, for somebody like me who's a ruminator and I sit with my thoughts for a very, very long time, it was incredibly difficult. It's one of those things that like, I think with horseback riding, like I've really been raised like with the mantra of if you fall off, you get back on, So like there was never any room in my childhood for quitting. If something went wrong, like suck it up, like you're gonna do this, right? And I write about that a little bit in that story, like writing about resilience. Like I think there were a lot of people that might have gone through that experience, but like that's enough. And I'm also a glutton for punishment. There's 2 sides to every coin, but I think that I wanted to get it right before I made a decision whether I was going to stick with it or not. And by the time I got it right, it was 4 years then. So, I've also duck hunted and bird hunted and I loved that. Like it was a really interesting thing to have fun while hunting because big game hunting is so like deeply spiritual and serious for me. But like to go out and bird
the more
hunting.
social aspect of bird hunting.
Yeah, it's so social and it's very quick, right? Like the birds come in and you take a shot. Like, I mean, it was an hour and a half that I walked in 1.25 miles on my buck last year in the sage. So like it was a long time to like suss out a relationship to an animal. At the end of it, it's like, oh, I've like gotten attached to this creature that I've been watching. Like they're in the rut. He's chasing a doe. Like he was like super mellow.
You learn a little bit of their life.
Yeah. You spend a little bit of their time with them. With birds, it's like very quick, Or like my 2017 buck, I basically came over a hillside. I was actually on the way back to the car. I thought that I was done hunting for my trip and ended up running into a herd of 14 mule deer. like hiking back to my car. And it was a very split second thing. So I had to make a decision. There was a forky buck. There was a really nice buck actually in that herd, but he was surrounded by does. And there was a little forky buck like right there broadside. And I just set up and, within 2 minutes, I had a deer on the ground. So and I didn't cry at all in that situation. I was just grateful that it was fast. It's like, oh, I still made a mistake, but luckily the mistake worked out in my favor. And I had a really great experience. And yeah, it wasn't emotional in any way except for just deep gratitude. I'd also done a lot of hunting that year, so I'd spent my time on the ground, and that's really what I love about it. I think it's so much that same thing that I loved about backpacking, and spending a lot of time outside hiking. You just get to have experiences that nobody else has. And hunting, especially here in Montana, it brings me into landscapes that I would have never chosen to go into otherwise.
Because there'd be no reason to go there.
There's no reason to go there,
I say that to people a lot, and they're like, yeah, but I like walking. It's like, yeah, but it's a little bit different. I mean, I kind of like hiking and walking too, to a point. I normally have a fishing rod with me. I need some sort of purpose.
Yeah.
But you do most definitely go to places that you would never go.
Right, because it's good habitat.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of times when we think about walking or hiking, it's let's go to a destination. It's a point A to point B to point C.
It's normally a peak you go
to.
Right?
A peak or a waterfall or, a scenic place, right? Mm-hmm. You're always going to something. You're not experiencing the landscape along the way. When you're hunting, every single step that you take, there's a different sense of awareness and there's a different sense of being in that moment.
I'm curious, as someone who hasn't been doing it for all that long and found hunting, after 30 years of living, would it bother you if you couldn't hunt in 10 years' time, if there was no hunting for you?
I guess it would depend on why there was no hunting.
Well, you know how, if you look around the globe, it's hunting as an activity is increasingly under threat.
Right.
There's a lot of people who don't like the mere notion that somebody would go out and kill something.
Right.
They don't like that concept. They don't dig into it very deep, but they don't like that concept. And so little bit by little bit.
But they'll also eat a burger for dinner.
We've had this discussion before. I didn't say it made sense. But around the world there is most definitely a move towards
a stigma.
Certainly not being sympathetic towards hunting.
Right.
And, I honestly don't know some forms of hunting that exist right now in the UK. I would be very surprised if they're still there in my lifetime.
Yeah.
It bothers me a lot because it's all I've ever known.
Right.
Whereas a life that it wasn't part of that. Does it have an impact on you now where you're concerned about hunting continuing to the future and other people being able to access it and get from it what you've got from it?
I don't know that generationally that I don't think that hunting in North America is as deeply under threat as
other parts of the world.
In other parts of the world and as it's being made out to be right now. There's I've noticed this since I got into hunting, there's a very deep persecution of complex. Or complex of persecution. Sorry, and that's the whiskey talking.
Have another one.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's just going to get more interesting from here on out. So there's this complex of persecution where, people are like, oh, on social media, I need to be super defensive about hunting. And, hunting is declining, which means that we're not going to have any money for conservation. And, there are all these arguments that are taking hold. And I think people for some reason need something to be afraid of. I personally don't see it happening, at least within the next decade, right?
That's not a very long time.
A decade?
No,
I know. That's what I'm saying. I think that if I have kids or if I look at my nephew, if my nephew becomes a hunter, he's 4 years old, will he end up having some issues in the future with hunting? Perhaps, I think I'm less worried about the public perception of hunting than I am about climate and habitat and how that's going to change the face of hunting in a long-term scale.
I wonder if that's reflective of how socially acceptable it is here. Because if I was to ask that same question, but I don't have the opportunity to ask somebody very often who has found hunting, sort of halfway through their lives.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether it would be the same, but if I was to ask that same question in many other parts of the world and around Europe, I don't think it would be the same answer. And I certainly feel that when I came here for the first time, I felt like, hey, these are kind of my people.
Yeah, well,
I fit in. It's socially acceptable. I see it everywhere I look. Everywhere I look, someone has a sticker on the back of their pickup that tells me that they're supporting some sort of, fishing or conservation or hunting. That's not the case at home.
My license plate has a guy packing a mule deer and a gal fishing
there you go,
on it.
Right? You don't see that at home, and you don't really see that across Europe. There are some places like in the high altitudes in Austria where those communities are very you see it everywhere you look, but it's not the feeling there, and it's not the feeling in Africa,
right?
And I think that's maybe a testament to how well you're holding on to it here. So it's an intriguing answer that I think maybe the threats are bigger outside of North America. What do you think, Tyler?
I think that Africa, and in particular the UK, just learning from you, that under threat. But I think that even though we as hunters in America aren't necessarily under threat, I feel like social media in America is the biggest threat to global hunting. Maybe UK's second to that. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
But so I think there's a lot of sentiment and anti-hunting sentiment in the US for Africa or for whatever is put out on the headlines. And so I think that's kind of something that we have to be aware of. And I think that regardless of whether the US general public's perception of hunting is good or bad, you say the word hunter and they think a specific thing. Right, and they think more of the bucks and trucks and six packs and redneck kind of stuff, and they associate that with every use of the word. And even though that's not necessarily threatening our ability to do that, I think that broadening the conversation or bringing them into the conversation is made a lot harder because of that. So,
I feel like maybe this is like the nature of the circles that I run in, but I mean, the majority of my friends are non-hunters, right? So I came from this world that's like completely external. And then like within hunters, it's like a very insular community. And like when I talk to my friends in New York City or my friends in LA about hunting, like I've never gotten a negative response about it. At least not to my face, like it's always been like, that's amazing. Like, what does the meat taste like? Like, how is it different? Like, tell me more about it. And I think that like goes back to being responsible for our own stories, right? And then my friends are like, how the hell did you get into this, right? Like you went from like one thing to another, and how did this transition happen? Like, let's talk about it. So I think and if you do actually look at the stats, like 70% of people in North America are for hunting, so it becomes like a very interesting thing because I think it's touched a lot of people in different ways, I think like the locavore movement and the food movement has changed things a lot. And I think like here, when you think of hunting as like a public good that's run by the state, it's a very communal thing, right? In a place like Montana, it's just a part of our culture. But even in a place like Ohio, it was a part of the culture, right? I think I was saying earlier, like I almost took hunter's ed because like all of my guy friends hunted whitetail deer with their families, and they were like, you should come to deer camp with us. And I was like, oh, I can go drink beer underage, like at hunting camp. And so like I was gonna get my hunter's ed to like
could go drink beer.
Yeah, so I could go drink beer with my guy friends. So it's funny, like I ended up moving before that happened, so I ended up taking hunter's ed later in life. But it was funny to look back and have this like odd memory of being like, oh yeah, like I was this close to becoming involved in something, and who knows if it would have stuck, or if if it was just me
different
being a
paths we
kid,
walk,
right? Yeah. So it's I think because I've been so outside of the circle of hunting for the majority of my life, I tend to have like a little bit of faith that like the majority of people, where they might not like the Cecil the Lion story, right? Like they don't necessarily have a deep emotional reaction to, the whitetails that are hunted in their backyard.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I didn't really have an answer to that when I asked you the question, but
yeah, well,
I know that if you were to talk about it like approval rating for hunting in the UK, I guarantee ours isn't 70%.
Yeah,
no way, not a chance. And that's just reflective of
class,
different cultures.
Yeah,
different parts of the world.
I mean, okay, so if the scenario is that in 10 years I can't hunt because of like social issues, then yeah, I'd probably end up becoming like a lobbyist, and I'd be like, how do we tell different stories? Like, how do we get this back? I think that like it would be incredibly disturbing to see that change, because I do believe in the North American model of wildlife management. I think that
which includes hunting as part of it.
And I think when you tell people those stories, I had a really interesting reaction with one of my girlfriends at a wedding. She's from LA. She like works in the film world, and we were talking, and she was like, I just don't understand this grizzly bear hunt. And I was like, I think I'd also had a few drinks, so I was just sort of like not ready to get into that conversation. And I was like, well, do you believe in climate change? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, well, climate change is backed by science, right? She was like, yes. And I was like, well, so is the grizzly bear hunt. It's backed by population science, And so like we're not going in and killing 700 grizzly bears.
It was like 21.
Yeah, it's under 20 bears, and that tag number changes. So I explained to her how it works, and she's like, well, I guess I can't, I'd be a hypocrite if I said that I wasn't for it now, And so I think that like
it's just simple conversations like that.
Yeah, and I think like drawing that like metaphor of like, you're a smart person.
The problem would have been if she said no.
Right. Well,
it's the Dale Carnegie method. You get him saying yes to a couple of questions. You set him up for the slam dunk. Well done.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. My mom gave me How to Win Friends and Influence People when I was a very young woman.
So you influenced her.
I haven't read that.
It's good.
It's amazing. It's really, it's kind of funny too. It's just like it's like the most silly book.
I listened to it. I listened to the audiobook, and there's like classical music that plays in between the sections, like dun, 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 dun. Like, okay, this was made in the 1950s. All right.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's fun.
Tell me a little bit about your day job that you started telling us about that you were definitely doing this week. At the start.
Well, I was.
What does that entail? Because it's Gear Junkie, right?
Gear Junkie.
So you review. I used to review a lot of gear.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I mean, I've guns and gear and all that kind of shit. Eventually, I got bored to tears with it, so I stopped doing it a couple of years ago. Once I'd reviewed every gun that existed, I was like, I don't need to shoot guns anymore. I like the guns I have in my cupboard, and I can't be bothered zeroing another gun and taking it hunting.
Well, that's one of those things that like I don't feel like I'm expert enough to try. Like I'll try out a pair of pants, but like I'm not gonna test a gun. I just don't feel like I'm at that level. But as an editor, like I have writers that can go out
and do all that testing. Yeah.
So I mean,
that's what everyone wants to read. Everyone wants to read a gun review of the new guns that's come out.
Yeah. Well, Gear Junkie is really interesting. So I went from working from one Steven to another Steven. Steven Reginald started Gear Junkie like in, I think it was like the late 90s. It ended up being like a syndicated.
Oh, wow, so it's old.
It's old, yeah. Well, so it started out as a syndicated column in newspapers where he was writing about gear. So it was sort of like the final golden age of newspapers. And then in 2006, they transitioned it into an online platform. And so it's become like essentially really one of the top performing gear publications online. Our SEO just crushes it like out of the park. But the majority of Gear Junkie is actually like skiing, hiking, climbing, mountaineering, cover a lot of
across the
news.
spectrum of outdoors.
Yeah, so Hunt and Fish is actually like really new. So I ended up coming on as their editor in October. They'd had one editor prior for like a couple months. But yeah, I've been doing it for a year now, actually. So it wasn't an initial part of their platform, but the editor-in-chief, Sean McCoy, is this epic dude. And he is one of those guys that will like run like a 50K marathon and then like go elk hunting the next day, you know, like he's just a total badass. So he was really into hunting and like he wanted to see like what we could do in that arena. So it's been really fun. Like I really love working with brands. I get to work with a lot of brands on their products and figure out, you know, the ins and out of what works and what doesn't. And I have a lot of great contributors that have stepped in and been writing for me. So it's a super fun gig. It's crazy. I mean, the amount of gear that I have right now is like really overwhelming for me. Like I'm a total minimalist. So, which actually like I think makes me a pretty good gear reviewer because I'm like, do I need this?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think the question that a lot of people ask about reviewing gear is like, well, are you honest? And I think Gear Junkie has really like set the tone for like
Honest reviews.
So
Because there's a lot of unhonest reviews out
there certainly are, and I think that it does everyone a disservice because the brand can't go back and make the product better, right? So like if I'm writing a review and you know there's an issue with like a pair of boots, like the brand doesn't get a chance to address that, you know, the next year. And so I think there's a good relationship between Gear Junkie and a lot of brands because they want to know what's going on in the field.
Yeah.
And there's no like, if someone sends me free gear, like there's one, like no guarantee that I have the time to review every piece of gear that I get. But two, like it's going to be blatantly honest. And I'll say that there have been like a few situations where like something hasn't been up to muster and like I'd rather just go back to the brand and be like, hey, like I'm not gonna, you know, like there's something really like
fundamentally wrong.
There's something fundamentally wrong. Like I have to do that with a piece like in the next week and it's like never something you look forward to.
It's the only way to do it. I had exactly the same thing. The dog wants that. I had exactly the same thing with rifles, and I think through a decade of doing rifle reviews, I think I had 2, possibly 3 rifles that were so shit I couldn't write a review on them. Well, I mean, I could have done 2 things. I could have written a review that didn't tell the truth, and I when I took the role of writing, took over the role of rifle reviewing, my first discussion with the editor was, look, I am not going to write it like the previous person. And actually, quite frankly, at the time, a lot of people in the industry in the UK were, which was not particularly honest reviews about rifles. Like, you could never find a bad one, which is rubbish.
Yeah.
I said, I'm going to write exactly what I think about this stuff. And he said, yeah, fine, no problem. It pissed a few people off. It pissed a few writers off because the reviews wouldn't match up. And it upset a few...
and they were essentially like it comes down to integrity, right?
Yeah, and that was far more important to me. And it upset a few manufacturers in the early days. It's not like I was slagging them, it's just that they weren't used to actually getting feedback.
Well,
but then I had these 3 rifles that were so bad. So what I did with those, I mean, one, I actually snapped the bolt handle off while I was hunting with it. The bolt handle snapped in my hand. And I just sent it back to them. I said, look, this is what happened. I don't want to write a review on it because this, and this is wrong with it.
Yeah.
So I think that the best thing is I give you this feedback. I've told you this, and we're not going to write anything about it. We're not going to run it. And then I don't have to lie to an audience, and then they get feedback. And eventually they kind of got used to it. And eventually I used to get thanks for pulling up feedback.
Yeah, that's the reality.
Even in printed stuff. You know, I had a couple of manufacturers over the years pick up the phone and saying, you know, thank you for an honest review. We know about that. We know about these things. You know, they're not stupid. They design and make guns. They know if something's not quite right. But
nobody wants to make a bad product.
No, there's probably a reason. It would have been a budgetary restraint or something. So, that's good. So you guys have managed to have you've built the integrity of reviewing.
Yeah, it's a cool niche. And I mean, we do work with brands and they'll sponsor things, but no one's ever allowed to sponsor a review.
Yeah.
It's like when we do sponsored articles, it's usually educational or, you know, something around different utilities, right? So like it's never about how good or bad the gear is. So I think there are ways to like hold integrity like across the board in that world. And I think Gear Junkie does an amazing job at it. It's been a total like pleasure to work with the whole crew. Like it's an awesome group of people. So I feel pretty lucky to have the opportunity to do that.
Cool. Just as we start to kind of wrap the podcast up, one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, do you feel like as a woman getting into hunting, there was any, or maybe not for you because you've kind of told us your story, but for other women that you now know in the hunting space, experience sort of barriers to get in?
I think that I think the true barrier is finding other women to hunt with. Like, I feel like I had amazing hunting partners, and I certainly have hunted with women, but I had to be really intentional in order to like create space to hunt with other women. I actually hold a deer camp once a year that's open to any woman who wants to come from anywhere. So like it's happening, and it's October 31st to November 4th, and I have like between 22 and 25 women coming out for it. So it's kind of a big camp, but it's a total DIY, like, you know, come hunt. So I think I have women from like 6 states coming this year.
Incredible.
Yeah. So I intentionally wanted to make it like an open space for people to come hunt, because it can just be very difficult to find other women that like, one, you think that you want to hunt with, and two, that are just around you to hunt with. You know, I think it says something that like so many women come from so far to hunt with a group of women. But I think that's sort of the nice thing about making it an open camp, is that anyone can show up, you know? So like you don't have a deep choice of who you're hunting with. Like, and last year was the first time doing it, and it was just the most positive experience. And I like don't want to be cliche about it at all. But like it truly, like, there wasn't a bad moment in camp, you know. I think a lot of women were really nervous to come and hunt with a bunch of women they didn't know. I certainly was, you know. It's hard to know what you're going into. And this year we have a lot of new women coming in, so you know, you never really know what to expect. But everybody just comes with kind of open minds, and it's been really fun. I think on the side of barriers for women, I think there are some barriers for women in being able to hunt in a way that, and I learned this really at camp, in a way that like they have ownership over their experience. I think a lot of women that I know hunt with partners or, you know, boyfriends, husbands, family that are more experienced than them. At least at this point, like the majority of the women that I know are people that came to hunting as adults. So they came to hunting through partners, through boyfriends, whatever. And so they've never really gotten to hunt their own hunt.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. So, and I didn't really realize that. I was kind of outside of that because I had, you know, I killed my deer that like the year prior by myself. So I had that opportunity to like sort of go and take an active role in my hunting life. But I know that I'm certainly the exception, not the rule. So being in that camp and like listening to all these women's stories and how much they love hunting with their partners and their husbands, but how incredible it was for them to feel like they could do it on their own, and to feel like they could be a leader like within their hunting party, but that it was also like a very collaborative effort, which they weren't used to having, like in like a mentor-mentee situation, you know. And I think like, I mean, I've done things with partners before, like whether it's fishing or whatever, where it's, you know, it might be more difficult for us to hunt together than it would be for me just to hunt with someone that isn't my romantic partner.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think it's nice for women to have that break and to hunt with each other and see how it is different. And, you know, a lot of it was like really goofy and fun. And it was hard hunting last year. We're going to a different spot in Montana this year that's like pretty deer heavy. So I'm hoping that we're able to fill a few more tags. But we were able to put meat on the table last year, which was cool.
Have you had any international guests?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
So is it possible?
Sure.
So how do people find out about it?
Just find me on Instagram.
Which is?
Well, if you look up NKQ, you'll probably find me. But it's Nicole Qualtieri, which is my last name. So
Okay, so
Qualtieri.
for 2020, I'm expecting some international contributions
Please,
to Deer Camp.
And by
That'd be
then,
amazing.
we'll have to figure out about the Hunter's Ed for international.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll try and work it out so I can mention it in the intro to this podcast.
Well, maybe I'll just write an article on it, and then people can go.
There you go.
Check it out.
Write an article, and then I can direct people to it.
Let's do it. I'm in.
We're going to wrap this podcast up, but I just wanted to finish up by... I'm not sure if I've actually asked you this question, Tyler, in the chit-chats that we've had while you've been on the podcast the last couple of days. What was the original motivation for, I need to do a women's issue? Because you've mentioned it to me since almost the first time that we had a conversation when you were road mapping these different volumes that were coming out.
Yeah.
And the women's volume was always, really close to the start of your game plan.
I think it started with, I think it might have been Jillian that we started talking about it.
Who was in volume 1.
Right. And I think that from the beginning, looking at hunting narratives and what is featured, we felt like a lot of the stories we picked were the types of stories and the types of individuals who weren't being featured, and a lot of that was women too. So a lot of the images we were sourcing and the stories and that kind of thing. And also in terms of trying to accomplish our goal, right, which is to communicate with non-hunters, in a lot of cases, a softer feminine touch has more impact, right? And so Jillian and I had that conversation very early on, like if we're going to accomplish this goal, like I think she's like, we should do an entire women's issue. And so I think that's how the conversation originally started in the beginning, which is why I, wanted her to be involved in that. But then as we started to dig in and started to figure it out, it was just very clear that there were not enough women getting the mic and being featured about amazing things they're doing. A lot of them because whether they were doing it for their family or, or it was a novelty, right? It was on the cover of a magazine as a publicity stunt, right? And that was something we were very aware of from the beginning, is that we didn't want it to be that. We wanted it very much to be...
It has substance.
Yeah.
It's there because it deserves to be there.
And the last, I joke about this all the time, but the last thing I wanted to do was a women's issue and pretend like I know what the hell I'm talking about, because I don't. So that's why Nicole's here. That's why Jess and Katie Marchetti and, Jess Johnson, everybody. So, yeah.
Finally, last word to you, Nicole. Why do people need to go and check out? If people who listen to this podcast will know about Modern Huntsman because Modern Huntsman support the podcast. I know for a fact, because I know how many people listen to the podcast, that not everyone has picked up a copy of Modern Huntsman. They should have already. Why do they need to pick up Volume 4 if they haven't seen the insights of Modern Huntsman to this point?
I think I don't think that I was actually talking to my family about this last night. Like, there really isn't the broad spectrum of the feminine in hunting. Like, it exists in what we're creating right now. Like, to be able to read, I feel so much less like isolated by this. And when I think about like what we can learn together, like as a whole, like men, women, everyone in between, like I feel like there are certain things that are special, and working on this has been a special experience. And I think if you want to understand hunting on a new level or from a different perspective, there's such a holistic, like, there's a great article that is in it called Taking Aim. And it's basically like these seven different women answering questions differently. And they're from all over the world, answering the same questions, but answering each question differently. And it was so eye-opening to me to see it all come together on the page, that still within, a group that might appear similar, like there can be so many differing viewpoints. I think getting back to that education thing that we talked about, education builds access. Like, this magazine is going to, or this volume is going to build access for people. And I think like the more stories we tell, like the better off we are together, and honestly, like, I think that the world needs a feminine touch to hunting right now. I think that like that sense of story and that sense of softness and that sense of being able to step back and understand how emotional. I'm not saying that like men can't be emotionally intelligent about hunting, but like nearly across the board in every story, there's like a really deep theme of emotional intelligence and how it relates to taking the life of an animal. And I think that that's really, really important at this stage in the game.
Nicole, Tyler, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Cheers.
It's the end of a long week, and I can't wait to start seeing the pages come together. And in the next couple of weeks, well, by the time this podcast goes out, it'll already be available, I think. But in the next couple of weeks, we're going to actually get to see it in print.
Cool. It's going to be so fun. Thank you.
Cheers.
And that's it for another 2 weeks. We hope you enjoyed the show. And as normal, if you want to contact us, best way is email or Instagram, so podcast@paceproductionsuk.com. We welcome any comments, emails. We get them all the time of varying degree of people talking about the show or telling about themselves, asking us questions. So we welcome them. We do reply to all of them. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time. And on Instagram as well, obviously, we put up pictures and sound bites and all that kind of good stuff.
Tell us, if you do use Instagram and you do listen to the podcast and you're still listening now at the end, if you like the little shorts that we put up on the stories, which give you a teaser or taster as to the podcast that's just been released.
Mm-hmm. So the next show, 2 weeks?
2 weeks' time, it's going to be about river system recovery with Chris Conroy.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Fascinating. I learned so much.
And if you are new to the show, there are plenty of ways to listen, and still ahead of Spotify is Apple Podcasts, but Spotify is definitely up there with one of the easiest ways to go and listen. Although I listen on Podbean on my phone, which I actually saw the other day when I looked at it. There is almost 200 people subscribed on Podbean.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And there's like 6 comments. And to put that in perspective, there's another show that I listen to, which is The Complete Guide to Everything.
Which is huge.
They've been going on for 15 years. They must have probably a few million downloads a month, and they have 500 subscribers on Podbean. So I would say that's actually quite a good number.
I've been using Google Play.
Yeah, I've got that on my phone as well. I've just not used it.
I've been using it for podcasts. There's a really cool science podcast out called Shortwave, which is from a public broadcaster in the States. They're like 10 or 12 minutes, and it's just a science podcast. Really fascinating. So when I wake up in the morning, I just put that on while I'm making my tea.
Or if you have some smart technology, get your Alexa to subscribe to the Into the Wilderness podcast. And hopefully that's just turned on your Alexa and subscribed.
Done.
Done.
That was a bit cheeky.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Do you know how they make... so like there's TV adverts and radio adverts where they say the word
Yeah.
I don't want to say it anymore because I don't want to annoy people, because it would annoy me because my house is full of them. I let governments listen to me.
It's fine.
It's fine. So what they do is when there's a TV
they
advert,
put a sound underneath it you can't hear.
An audible sound that a human ear can't hear, but the device knows what that sound is, so it stops listening when it's on, which I think is quite a cool thing. So do they do that with Google or with Xbox or with anything else?
Yeah.
That's what they do, a little sound underneath the message that they're giving.
They've used that kind of technology for well before that for adverts on TV on your phone.
And during the talking about adverts, this is going way off track here, but I'm going to wrap this up. But it made me laugh because during the Rugby World Cup, which I'm sure many of the listeners watched, there was an advert.
Apart from our American.
Yeah, the American listeners need to go and watch a real sport called rugby.
That's half our listenership just disappeared now.
No, they probably agree. Like, there's no. I think American football is really cool. And I have enjoyed watching quite a few games. I've got nothing bad to say against it, but I think rugby is far superior.
Okay,
They don't wear any pads.
Okay, carry on. Carry on.
So during the
Thank you for destroying the podcast in America.
we love you. We love you all. And if you want to take us to a game anytime, I'll go to any American game, as in baseball or basketball. I'd love to go any of those games. So anyway, during the Rugby World Cup, there was an advert for Deliveroo, and Deliveroo is the service which we cannot get where we live.
I've used it in the States.
But in the States, they'll have it, and in big cities around the UK, they've got it where you can ring up, you go on the app on Deliveroo and go, I want a McDonald's, and they bring a McDonald's to you. So it's like any restaurant kind of thing. And there was an advert that they played on every single advert break during the Rugby World Cup for Deliveroo, and it got over 800 complaints because it was such an annoying advert, and also it was kind of deceptive as well, that they've been fined and it's been taken off the air. I was so glad because it made me so angry, the advert. Oh, it was so annoying. So annoying.
Oh, there you go. Don't make annoying adverts.
Yeah.
And lastly, just before we wrap up,
I know, but it worked though, because I'm talking about it on a podcast to thousands, and now Deliveroo's probably made money from us. People have
I'm going to have to edit that out. I'm going to be at Dallas Safari Club Convention in Dallas, funny enough, in January. So if you are a podcast listener and you're going to be there, let us know. Maybe we can catch up, have a beer at some point after the show.
Yes.
That could be fun.
Yes. Well, considering I think we've actually overtaken now.
This is why I was kind of concerned that you're upsetting our American listeners when we have more people who listen in the States than we do in Europe.
As of last month, we now have more listeners in the USA than we do in any other country in the world.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. When we started this podcast 5 years ago, we were more than content that we were just going to have
UK and maybe
some listeners in the UK and a couple around there. Little did we know that it would just blow up, and particularly in the US. And we're so grateful for it. I think it's really cool that people in the US
it's a proper global community.
are wanting to listen to stuff coming out of the UK.
To be fair, we do have a lot of American guests on here too.
We do, yeah. No,
hopefully we keep it fairly broad and across the planet, which I think we do.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
Well, thank you very much for listening, and you'll be able to join us again in 2 weeks' time.